Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Tsiu River and its delta in southeast Alaska. This area is nearly sea level and consists of sand and gravel bars split by fingers of the Tsiu River as it makes its way into the Gulf of Alaska. As it braids into different streams, it creates several avenues for fishermen to pitch lures and tempt hungry salmon making their way up the waterway. As the subjects of our episode found out, it isn't only fishermen who stalk the brush and swales. In the months before August 1986, Bob and Marietta Herron were organizing a salmon fishing trip along the Tsiu River in Alaska. They pitched the idea to their friend Bill Myers, and he decided to tag along. By August, their plans for a salmon fishing trip into the Alaska wilds were transforming into reality. As the fishing trip approached, Bob had inquired of the outfitter, Brent, if they should bring firearms with them. Brent informed them that firearms are no good unless you know how to use them, so Bob and Marietta brought Bill along with them to the shooting range for practice. Bob and Marietta had purchased twin .357 Magnums manufactured by Colt, and Bill had opted for the .357 Magnum by Smith & Wesson. All three pistols were revolvers and very powerful in form and function. Brent, the outfitter, agreed to set up all the necessary equipment, transportation, and rigging for the fishing expedition. Dates were set and arrangements were made to bring the three Los Angelinos to the land of the midnight sun. When the departure date arrived, they knew they would have no concerns about their trip. The food, shelter, and fishing gear were up there waiting for them. After a series of flights and relaying flights, they eventually stepped from a small aircraft onto the sandbars along the Tsiu River Delta and the promise of pure salmon fishing bliss it offered. Bob and Marietta glanced around the delta, took in the cool, clean air, and stared at the forested rise just above their camp. The Gulf of Alaska lapped upon the shore as the camp assistant Brenda erected the wall tents. The tents were canvas fabric placed over a plywood floor and walls. There were 4 tents up, and Bob and Marietta and Bill chose theirs and deposited their belongings inside. Soon a young man, probably in his mid-20s, walked up and introduced himself. He announced to the group that he would be their guide for the fishing trip and introduced himself as Randy. By his side was his wife and the camp cook, Betty. Back in the big city, the three friends relied on professionals for everything. If your electrical system had some problems, you called an electrician. If there were potholes in the road, the city maintenance department would come out and fill it. At the fishing camp, they quickly learned that if there was something that needed to be done, they needed to do it. They gathered the wood for a campfire and rolled logs near it to sit on. Soon another couple emerged from one of the wall tents. They introduced themselves as Paul and Laco Whitestone. Paul was a mellow guy, and Laco was an energetic balance to her partner. He had brought along a single-action .44 Magnum and a .38 caliber pistol, just for reassurance. Not wanting to waste time, each person grabbed a pole and headed toward the winding series of fingers the river splits into just behind their camp. The fishing was exciting and productive. The group pulled in 6 big and beautiful silver salmon by late afternoon. Randy gathered the fish and cleaned them. He placed each of the fish into a single plastic bag and used rocks to submerge it in the creek, Bob's and his tent mate's wall tent. After some quality time around the campfire, with their bellies full, the fishing party all headed for their bunks and some sleep. They planned for an early and long day fishing, so rest would be important for them. At about 4 a.m., the entire camp was awakened by an increasingly shrill scream of "Bear! Bear! Bear!" from the camp cook, Betty. Everyone quickly stumbled from their tents, flashlights searching the darkness. Bob asked Betty what had happened, and she explained that she had heard a crash outside of her tent. When she shined her flashlight, she watched as a gigantic brown bear dashed into the bushes on the edge of the camp. The campers began to look around where the bear had been seen, and quickly noted that their cooler had been crushed. The barbecue grill was smashed, and the rubber dinghy had been ripped up. The 6 salmon that Randy had submerged behind Bob's tent were missing, bag and all. They were far too excited to consider going back to bed, so they waited until the sun came up around 5 a.m. and went back to fishing. As soon as the sun rose, a sense of safety and optimism filled the fishing party. They cast their lures in the river and reeled in several glimmering salmon, but the bear continually crossed their minds. Randy could see the concern on their brows and reassured them that they had nothing to worry about. Toward the middle of the afternoon, the outfitter Brent flew in with some additional supplies. The fishing party gathered around his plane in excitement and relayed their account of the brown bear visit. After listening to the damage it had done to the camp, Brent looked at the group and said, "You may have to do away with that bear." The campers all stared at him, half expecting him to provide further information or instruction. When they realized that was his complete statement, they understood he expected them to handle the bear themselves. The tone of Brent's discussion with the group gave them an uneasy feeling. They tried to fish, but eventually ended up milling around camp and waiting for dinner. Marietta was worried, and at the campfire suggested the campers organize a bear watch. Randy was off-put by this suggestion, and played down her fears. After realizing he couldn't talk her out of it, he tacitly agreed. Just as the twilight was setting in, at around 10:30 p.m., the bear was spotted about 200 yards from camp. The campers began to yell and picked up pots and pans to cling together. The bear was driven off by all the noise, but the campers were all uneasy at the fact that it had already returned to the area around their camp. After everyone went to bed, Marietta, Bill, and Randy stayed up and talked around the campfire, serving their shifts on the bear watch. Brenda also stayed up and gladly borrowed Paul's .44 mag to reassure herself. Randy had a .30-06 hunting rifle and leaned it up against a nearby log. He had a difficult time hiding his frustration with the amount of fear that gripped the campers. Even though he was youthful, he was accustomed to salmon fishing alongside bears and didn't believe the bear posed any serious threat yet. As the evening went on, rain began to drizzle, making the bleak mood even more so. Around 12:30 a.m., the bear was spotlighted by the moonlight, which brought the pots and pans and screams from the campers once again. This time, he seemed to leave more reluctantly than before. Within 2 hours he had returned, and this time was only 70 yards away from the camp. Pots and pans clanging together and frustrated screams for much longer than before finally drove him off for the rest of the night. At sunup, the members of the Bear Watch retired for some rest. The group was beleaguered by the stress and worry the standoffs with the bear had brought. Later on that morning, a charter plane landed on the sandbar, and a pair of fishermen stepped off. After approaching the new arrivals, the elder of the group asked Bob what it was that he was packing on his hip. Bob relayed that it was a .357 Magnum pistol, and passed on the details of the encounter with the bear. The elder fisherman informed him that shooting a brown bear with a .357 mag was like trying to knock a bowling pin over with a marble. He stated that the only thing you could do with that small of a gun is put yourself out of your misery after the bear attack. With this info, Bob understood the only firearm that was adequate to protect the group was Randy's .30-06 rifle. Marietta had lost all interest in fishing, and by dinner time had volunteered to stay up again to watch for the bear. This time Randy's wife Betty agreed to keep her company. At about 1 a.m. a dense fog rolled into the camp, limiting visibility to just a few feet and making a bear watch impossible. Betty and Marietta decided to go to bed since staying up to watch was not going to be productive. At 2:30 a.m. Lyko woke up and didn't see anyone on bear watch. By around 4 a.m. Lyko woke everyone up in camp by banging on the garbage can lid. The campers stumbled from their tents and observed the bear only 50 yards away in the brush, just east of the camp. Under the illumination of several flashlights, the bear tossed its head back and forth, sniffing the scent of each of the campers. Bob, Bill, and another one of the campers fired 7 warning shots into the air before the bear decided to leave. The rest of the night was filled with anxiety and restlessness, despite the bear not returning. The next day, fishing was lackluster, and the group was tortured with the thought of the bear's return to their camp. Some of them wanted to leave as soon as possible, but given they had no radio in camp, they could not arrange a flight back to safety. At one point, Bob asked Randy how they would know if they needed to shoot the bear. Randy flatly replied, "You will know," and stared back for a few seconds. That night, Bill and camp assistant Brenda took responsibility for the bear watch. The northern lights added to the moonlight to show the bear appearing about 150 yards from camp. It was loping parallel to the camp as Bill clambered to his feet. He lifted his pistol and fired once into the air. The bear seemed to pick up its pace and then veered off toward a ranger camp down the beach. At just after 1 a.m., Bill climbed into his bunk and announced he was going to sleep. He indicated that Brenda was still out there, so Bob decided to keep her company to help pass the time. By 2 a.m., Bob picked up the bear's silhouette out on a sandbar about 70 yards from the camp and to the west. It was walking toward the camp, so Bob hopped to his feet and yelled at the bear as he fired shots into the air. Previously, after hearing the shots, the bear would begin to move away, but this time it picked up its pace as it headed toward the camp. By the time the bear was only 15 yards away and across a small creek, the rest of the campers had emerged. They joined in a loud and terrified chorus of screams and yells, banging and shooting. Hiding themselves behind a log, they kept the fire between them and the bear as it swung its head from side to side, sampling their scents once again. The frustration of the past few days began to well up in Bob, and he told the group that there would be no more warning shots. The bear knew good and well that they were people and not prey, yet it grew in boldness and aggression toward them. The noise and warning shots had only brought it closer, and now only 15 yards separated it from them. The comments the charter plane fisherman made about how inadequate a .357 Magnum would be for self-defense from a brown bear haunted Bob's mind. He quickly barked out orders to Marietta to put her pistol into the bear's ear and pull the trigger if it attacked him. The armed campers now agreed to shoot to kill if the bear crossed the small creek toward their camp. The bear was standing on its hind feet and swinging its head back and forth when it suddenly dropped to all fours and splashed into the creek, separating it from the campers. Bob and Bill began shooting, but Bob was hoping to hear a much larger volley. He urgently wanted to hear the roar of Randy's .30-06, but only heard him mutter, "Oh, damn." Paul and Brenda didn't fire a single shot, but seemed frozen in terror. The charging bear suddenly stopped in the middle of the creek. Randy yelled out to everyone to stop shooting, announcing that it hadn't been wounded yet. He stated he'd seen the bullets that were fired splashing into the surrounding water. Just as the bear turned away ever so slightly, Bob finished squeezing off one last shot. The bear jumped after Bob's shot, and the muzzle flash allowed him to see the bear's legs jerk in reaction to something. The bear disappeared into the darkness, leaving the campers uncertain of its condition and location. With almost half of the night remaining, the campers gathered around the campfire and continually watched for the bear to reappear. Randy was checking out his .30-06 and had removed the bullet that wouldn't fire from its action. After examining the bullet, he pointed out that the firing pin hadn't dented the primer. The rifle was too dirty to operate reliably, and clearly hadn't been cleaned or fired in a long time. As the campers warily watched, they would see the bear a few times throughout the remaining hours. It would dash from one place to another a few hundred yards away, then disappear for a while. Then in another place it would dash across a sandbar, to disappear once again. After a few tense hours, the sunrise brought the twilight of morning. Bob and Randy searched the sandbars and gravel swales for the bear, when Randy pointed out a large mound of gravel that wasn't familiar to them, a few hundred yards away. The men agreed to go investigate and cautiously made their way toward the mound. Several yards away from it, they could see a long line of bear scat, finishing at the bear's carcass. It had purged its bowels as it staggered, its final few steps before expiring. Randy rolled the bear over and quickly began to perform an informal necropsy on the bear's carcass. After examining the bear's hide, he found that only 2 bullets had struck the bear, and they were both .357 Magnum rounds. The first bullet had struck the bear in the thigh and lodged just above the leg joint. The second bullet struck the bear near the back of its ribs and traveled through one of the bear's lungs. It lodged just under the skin of the bear's chest. By mid-afternoon, the fishing party was now relieved and even giddy, knowing the bear would no longer threaten them. Brent had flown in again to deliver more supplies and was greeted with a full story detailing the bear's death. Following the exuberance, Brent relayed that on his way in he'd buzzed a giant brown bear about a mile away, headed in a straight line toward the fishing camp. Bob and Marietta opted to return with Brent, and on their way out they buzzed the bear at only 1/2 mile from the fishing camp. After reviewing the accounts of this episode, I have a few questions for you. Was the bear behaving in a territorial or predatory manner toward the fishing campers? Why did the campers fire so many warning shots? Do you think Randy knew his rifle was inoperable? Would you ever put your fish within 10 yards of your tent? I sure wouldn't. I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.